10 trucks once ruled every highway in America. No hood, no long nose, just a flat face and a driver sitting right on top of the engine. Truckers called them widowmakers, but they loved them anyway. One of them hauled a space shuttle. One starred in a Burt Reynolds movie. One almost killed General Motors' truck division. Number 10 was built to be the smartest truck ever made. It flopped anyway. 10 the GMC Crackerbox in 1959. General Motors tried to build the most advanced semi-truck in the world. They called it the GMC DLR 8000 and DFR 8000. Truckers called it something else, the Crackerbox. The name came from the shape. The cab was only 48 inches long, built entirely out of aluminum, and it stood straight up like a box of saltine crackers on wheels. But looks were never the point. GM stripped every ounce of weight they could find. The frame was 50% lighter than anything else on the road. The cab had independent front suspension, power steering, and full air ride, features most trucks would not get for another 20 years. Buyers could order a 702 cubic inch V12 gas engine or a Detroit diesel 671, 6V71, 8V71, or even a 12V71. That short 48-inch cab meant more room for trailer, which meant more freight, which meant more money for the trucking companies that bought them. Drivers hated them. The ride was brutal since the cab sat right over the front axle. Sleeper versions gave drivers a bunk just 24 inches wide, barely enough room to turn over. It was loud, cold in winter, and every bump in the road went straight into your spine. GM built these from 1959 to 1968, then gave up and replaced them with something friendlier called the Astro 95. But for almost a decade, the Crackerbox proved that being the most advanced truck on paper does not mean truckers will love driving it. Today, finding a Crackerbox still running is rare enough to stop traffic at any truck show. 9 the Mack Cherry Picker trucks has been building rigs since 1900, starting with a sightseeing bus in Brooklyn before moving into heavy hauling. By the 1950s, they needed a Cabover to compete, and what they built was almost comically tall. Officially, it was the Mack H model. Everyone called it the Cherry Picker because the cab towered so high above the road that climbing in felt like climbing a ladder. Mack built it this way on purpose. Length laws at the time capped trucks and trailers at 45 feet total, so Mack needed a short cab that still gave drivers room to sit comfortably. Going tall instead of long solved the problem. The first version, the H60, ran a thermodyne gas engine putting out 170 horsepower, and Mack only built 81 of them between 1953 and 1954. The diesel version, the H61, used Mack's own end engine or an optional Cummins, and that one was more popular, built between 1952 and 1957. Later, Mack dropped the roofline about a foot with the H67 model, making it slightly less punishing to drive. The Cherry Picker never became a huge seller compared to Mack's conventional trucks, but it earned a permanent spot in trucking folklore for being the tallest cabover most drivers had ever climbed into. Old-timers who drove one still talk about the view from up top, like sitting in the cab of a freight train. Mack eventually replaced it with the more modern F-Series Cabover in 1962, a truck that went on to become a huge hit overseas, especially in the Netherlands and the Middle East heavy haulage business. 8. The Freightliner bubble knows every Freightliner on the road today traces back to one frustrated business owner. In 1929, Leland James started a freight company in Portland, Oregon called Consolidated Freightways. He tried every truck brand on the market and hated all of them, so he decided to build his own. James set up a small shop using old Farjoul trucks as a starting point and reworked them into something lighter and more efficient. He put the cab directly over the front axle to save length, and he built the whole thing out of aluminum instead of steel to save weight. Every pound saved was another pound of freight his trucks could legally carry. The name Freightliner first appeared on these trucks in the 1930s. World War II paused production, but by 1947 the company was back building cabovers for its own fleet. In 1949, Freightliner sold its first truck to an outside buyer, a forklift company called Hister. That original truck is now sitting in the Smithsonian. Freightliner eventually split from White in 1974 and kept building cabovers long after most other manufacturers gave up on the style. The very last Freightliner cabover, the Argosy, did not stop production until 2020, which means the DNA of Leland James' frustrated garage project survived on American roads for nearly 80 years. 7. The International TranStar International Harvester had been building farm equipment and trucks since the 1800s, and by the early 1960s their cabover, nicknamed the Emeryville after the California plant that built it, was the best-selling heavy truck in America 4 years running. In 1965, International replaced it with a bigger, wider cab called the CO 4000. 3 years later, in 1968, that truck got a new name that would become legendary, the Transtar. It ran International's own turbocharged DVT 573 diesel, with Cummins and Detroit diesel engines available as options. The cab was famous for its tall trapezoidal grille, a shape so distinctive that International kept using it on Cabovers all the way into the late 1990s. In 1970, International rolled out the Super Transtar, powered by a Detroit diesel 12V71 engine capable of pulling loads up to 65,000 kilograms. Then in 1974 came the Transtar 2, which packed in serious engine options, including the Cummins KT450, a massive 1,150 cubic inch six-cylinder that remains one of the largest diesel engines ever put into a regular production highway truck. The ride was rough since these trucks used a rubber block suspension instead of air ride, and engine noise inside the cab could rattle your teeth at highway speed. But drivers loved the visibility, the tight turning radius, and the roomy interior compared to other Cabovers of the era. Production of the original Transtar Cabover ran until 1981, when International replaced it with the CO 96 and 70, also known as the Newport Series 6, the White Road Commander 2. By the early 1970s, White Motor Company needed a fresh Cabover to compete with Kenworth, Peterbilt, and the new aerodynamic designs hitting the market. What they came up with had an unexpected creator behind it. The original Road Commander launched in 1972, but the truck that really mattered was the 1975 update, the Road Commander 2. White brought in designer Larry Shinoda to rework the truck's looks. Shinoda was not a truck guy. He had designed the Corvette Stingray and the Boss 302 Mustang for Ford. Putting a sports car designer on a semi-truck was an unusual move, but it worked. The Road Commander 2 got a split wraparound windshield and white signature tapered doors, giving it a sharper, more modern face than the boxy trucks around it. Under the skin, the frame was bolted together from high tensile steel, and the aluminum cab tilted forward hydraulically for easy engine access. Buyers could spec engines from Cummins, Caterpillar, or Detroit diesel, ranging anywhere from 190 to 450 horsepower depending on the job. A sports car designer, helping keep a bankrupt truck company's Cabover on the road, right up until the end, is one of the stranger footnotes in trucking history. 5 the Ford W Series and CL9000 Ford wanted into the Cabover market badly, and their answer became one of the most famous movie trucks ever built. Ford's W Series Cabover ran from 1966 through 1977, built at the massive Kentucky truck plant in Louisville. It looked tough and boxy, exactly the kind of trucker in the 1970s wanted to drive. Then in 1975, a movie called White Line Fever hit theatres, starring Jan Michael Vincent as an independent trucker with a rig nicknamed the Blue Mule. That truck was a Ford WT9000, and the movie sent Ford's Cabover into pop culture history. Truckers who grew up watching that film spent decades afterward hunting down their own WT9000 just to relive it. Ford followed up in 1978 with something far more advanced, the CL9000. This truck stunned the industry because its entire cab was mounted on an air suspension system, floating separately from the frame to smooth out the brutal ride Cabover drivers usually suffered through. It was one of the first American trucks to solve the comfort problem that plagued every Cabover before it, borrowing an idea Europeans had already been using for years. Base power came from a Cummins NTC 290 diesel, and buyers could step all the way up to a Cummins KTA 600, a 1,150 cubic inch engine pushing 600 horsepower, a genuinely massive number for the era. For the Peterbilt 352 out on the west coast, one partnership between a truck builder and a trucking company created something nobody else was doing. In the mid-1950s, Peterbilt teamed up with Pacific Intermountain Express, known simply as PIE, one of the biggest common carriers in the American West. Together they developed what was called the dromedary design, a long wheelbase cabover truck with a cargo box built right behind the cab, stretching all the way back to a fifth wheel hitch for a trailer. This setup let a single truck haul a shorter trailer while still carrying serious extra freight in its own built-in cargo box, an idea that became the blueprint for what truckers later called West Coast doubles. The Peterbilt Cabover itself, badged as the Model 352 and later joined by the 359, became the backbone of PIE. S-Fleet, and a common sight rolling through California, Nevada, and up into the Pacific Northwest. Peterbilt drivers out west favoured these trucks because tight-length laws in many states made a cabover mandatory if you wanted to run a full-size trailer. It carried the dromedary bloodline forward for another 2 decades, and production of the 362 finally ended in 2005, closing out one of the longest cabover runs in American trucking. The Kenworth K100 Aerodyne built the truck that many drivers still call the greatest cabover ever made, and it happened almost by accident during America's 250th birthday. The K100 had been around since 1961 as one of Kenworth's core cabover models. But everything changed in 1976 when Kenworth introduced the Aerodyne raised roof sleeper. This was the first factory-built sleeper cab in America, with a full 7 feet of standing headroom, meaning a driver could actually stand up, straight inside the bunk, instead of crawling around bent over. The raised roof also cut down on wind drag hitting the trailer behind it, an unexpected fuel savings bonus nobody had planned for. To celebrate the American bicentennial, Kenworth built a limited run of trucks called the V200, short for Very Important Trucker. Only 100 cabovers and 100 conventionals got this treatment, each one wearing a special red, white and blue paint scheme. One of those very trucks was custom built for Daredevil Evel Knievel. That same year, a Kenworth K100 was used to haul an actual space shuttle, proving these trucks could handle jobs most rigs never dreamed of. The K100 Aerodyne then found its way into pop culture in a huge way. A red and white version starred as the hero truck in the NBC television series BJ and the Bear, which ran from 1979 to 1981, and made the Aerodyne instantly recognizable to millions of viewers who had never even seen a real semi-truck up close. Ask any trucker to name the most beautiful cabover ever built, and there is a very good chance they will say Kenworth Aerodyne without even pausing to think about it. The Diamond T and White Freightliner Penthouse cabovers earned their fame purely by being handsome, and this next one might be the best looking flat-nosed truck Detroit ever built. Diamond T started out in Chicago back in 1905, founded by C.A. Tilt, whose own shoemaker father designed the company's diamond-shaped logo. Diamond T built its reputation on tough, good-looking trucks through the 1930s, becoming one of Mack's biggest competitors of that era. Their late 1950s cabover design stood out immediately with horizontal chrome bars across the grille and a gently curved front end that gave off an almost locomotive-style look, similar to European electric trains of that period. The upper cab section actually sat slightly set back from the lower body's leading edge, a small styling detail that made the whole truck look sleeker than the boxy competition around it. Diamond T's own badge disappeared after the Diamond Rio merger, but the styling cues from that late 1950s cabover, the chrome grille bars, the gentle curve, the locomotive stance, still get brought up at truck shows as one of the best looking cabovers ever built. It proved that even in an era obsessed with saving weight and beating length laws, a truck could still turn heads doing it. The Peterbilt 372 Darth Vader every list needs a truck that represents the absolute finish line, and this one earns that spot by being both the most advanced cabover ever built in America and the last real gasp of the entire style before it disappeared from highways for good. Peterbilt unveiled the model 372 in 1988, and it looked like nothing else on the road. The raised roof gave drivers a genuine sleeper with real standing room, while a curved 2-piece windshield wrapped around the front for better visibility than any cabover before it. The signature feature sat right above the windshield, a sharp visor that stuck out from the roofline, engineered specifically to guide airflow smoothly over the top of the trailer and cut fuel-burning drag. It was one of the most aerodynamically refined cabovers ever built by an American manufacturer. That aggressive, angular face is exactly why drivers nicknamed it Darth Vader almost the moment it hit dealer lots. Some truckers, put off by how radical the design looked compared to the classic flat-faced cabovers they grew up driving, called it the football helmet instead. Opinions were split hard. Some drivers thought it was the most futuristic, best-looking cabover Peterbilt ever built. Others thought it looked like nothing that belonged on an American highway at all. Timing worked against it. The Surface Transportation Assistance Act of 1982 had already abolished the strict overall length limits that made cabovers necessary in the first place. Once trucking companies could run a full-size conventional truck with a long hood and still tow a legal trailer, the entire reason cabovers existed began to disappear. Conventional trucks rode smoother, gave mechanics easier access to the engine, and did not force drivers to crawl over the motor just to reach the sleeper bunk. By 1993, Peterbilt pulled the plug on the 372 entirely. These 10 trucks carried American freight for decades before length laws changed, and conventional trucks took over for good. If you ever drove one of these, or if your dad or grandpa did, drop the model in the comments below. Let us know which one you would want to see restored and back on the highway today.